Roger John Madden, sitting in my camper van, which is beached right now because the brakes are so bad and the transmission is dangerous to drive. And I have for several days now been parked in one little spot in Juarez Park, which is part of the Zona Centro, the downtown of Jalapa, Mexico. I'll give you a little glimpse of the street scene. It's not anywhere near as exciting on a Saturday morning as it is on a weekday. That would all be jammed with cars on a weekday at this point, which is I think like 8 o'clock. But I'm off on a little spur, which is super safe, and I've gotten to know a bunch of the neighbors already, and there's a great coffee shop. I'm blocking on the name. I'll put it as a comment. Great coffee shop right around the corner. I'm going to do a long form about the Catholic Church. This is something that's been brewing in me for a long time. I've shot a lot of videos about the Catholic Church during my 3 years of travel now in a camper van. And everywhere I go, I get curious. Is the Catholic Church a force for good, or primarily a force for the old way and not for liberation for people? So I ask that question everywhere and get different answers in different places. Mostly it's a fundamentally the Catholic Church has always been more a force for poverty and weakness and ignorance in the world and violence and rape. Popes have signed off on the conquest of Mexico. Basically, the Pope's stance to the Spanish was, do whatever you have to do to turn them to Jesus. If you have to kill a whole lot of them, I'll wink at that. Just bring them, because the Catholic Church thinks that that's all that counts. And so the Spaniards were a horrific force. And the story that's not been told, but has been told in a wonderful Throughline podcast called The Conquest, and I'll put a link to that. They raped and killed their way through Latin America to bring dominance and wiped out the way more civilized, the Aztec civilization at that time around 1500. The major city, which I can't pronounce the indigenous name for it, is in the exact site of the current Mexico City and was 120,000 people at a time when London was 20,000, and incredibly sophisticated, and the Spaniards destroyed it. And the line that's been told ever since, the European lie, is that they brought enlightenment, they brought civilization, and that it was good for Mexico and good for Latin America, which is absolutely a lie. And the Mexican government is starting to wake up to that and starting to celebrate the indigenous populations and rename all kinds of stuff with indigenous names. And that's especially true here in Jalapa, which is way up in the mountains, and there are indigenous communities thriving out in other areas of the mountains. I hope to tour and see some. I've already seen a couple in my travels, which were stunning. I have a very intimate relationship over the years with the Catholic Church. My dad was not really religious. Catholic Church was more horrendous on men because the priest was the powerhouse and no man was supposed to ever challenge him. And because the Catholic Church was so oppressive of sexuality, I believe it's still true, it's always been true, the official Catholic position about sexuality is that the only way or time that sex is okay is if it's for procreation. No other partners, no other forms of sexuality that can't lead to a baby. Shouldn't do it at a time when the woman can't procreate. And even then, if you take too much pleasure in it, that's always been the position. I don't know if they try to say that anymore. If you take too much pleasure in it, it's still a sin. Even if it's for the purpose of creating a baby. You should take all kinds of precautions to make sure you don't get too excited. Yeah. I used to think it was especially my Irish Catholic puritanical form of Catholicism that was so destructive, but what I'm realizing is no, it was European. It was true all through Europe, and I've watched some videos on YouTube that explain how in the Middle Ages there were lots of places where people just didn't take that seriously. They saw through the bullshit because they saw the priests violating all the tenets, having their sex. And there's a great movie called Doubt with Meryl Streep and Philip Seymour Hoffman playing the rebellious priest, and Meryl Streep does an awesome job of being the hellacious force for the old who tries to destroy this young priest. Really good movie, which tells the tale these days too much. The two people in my life who remained most devout Catholics were my ex-wife and my stepbrother Dennis. Sandy has done an awful lot of good in her life, but I think is fundamentally a very angry, destructive woman, and has successfully destroyed my son's relationship with me. Dennis is a really wonderful, beautiful man who his relationship as a devout Catholic is that he's a child. He's a child still looking to be told he's good, rather than a man who can make his own decisions. And I think it's not a distortion of the Protestant Revolution to say that their stance was don't go through Rome. The Pope has not got the goods. He's not the only one with access to truth. Find your own relationship with truth. And here in Mexico, I'm really curious about, is the Catholic Church in Mexico really a force for the poor, which I think may be more true than in the U.S., where it's a force for the old and the rich especially. Now, we have a good Pope. I say we in the world, have a good Pope. What's his name? Benedict, something like that, who is a good man and is trying to liberalize the church. But there are so many forces within the church fighting against him. And it was just in the news this week, he removed a Texas bishop who outright was a Trumper. I don't know if he ever said Trump, but those were his values. And he fought for them and fought to undermine what Benedict is trying to do. But you know, in my youth, in my high school years, there was Pope John the 23rd, brought in folk masses and did so many things to liberalize the church. But it goes right back to where the power is in that church. It's become more or less and less relevant in most of the world. No, not so much in Mexico, although in Mexico the Pentecostalists are really, really not just chipping away. There's a big turn to Pentecostalists. And they seem overall to be healthier to me. In El Diamante, where I was broken down for 3 months, it's a little 400-person pueblo, more people went to Pentecostalist churches than to the one Catholic church. And a couple of really great conversations I had with Pentecostalists where I would say, well, Jesus is not really my teacher. He was for a long time, and I still love Jesus and love most of what he taught, which has been so distorted over the years. But he's not my primary teacher. And they'd say, okay, so what? It doesn't matter. Denomination doesn't matter. What really counts is your love for God, and I've got that. Boom, I've got that real solid in trust. So, love of God, and they've got it. They've got it. And then even here in Jalapa, I will encounter people who, when you ask, ¿Cómo está?, they'll say, muy bien, gracias a Dios. They give... I tear up. They want to give credit to God. They're grateful. They know that they're part of something much bigger than them, and that it's not their personality that's creating the happiness in their lives. My waking up, my liberation from any form, my great rock and roll guru, Van Morrison, had an album called No Guru, No Method, No Teacher. And that's me. I don't need a teacher anymore because I have direct pipeline to God, and God coaches me about all things great and small. So I don't need a teacher anymore. I've had a number of human